international experts from the IMF believe that African growth would be somewhere in the region of 6 to 6.5%. Nigeria will beat that African average, expected to grow somewhere in the region of 7%. And it seems that Nigerian authorities concur with that view. Joining us now to discuss Nigeria's GDP projections for the year 2011 is a familiar face on the program, Bismarck Rewane, who is with Financial Derivatives. He's the CEO there. Bismarck, thank you very much for your time. As I said earlier on, it's believed that Nigeria would grow 7% this year. Do official figures support that view?
Yes, I think we'll be able to achieve 7% growth this year. The official figure for the last quarter, which is Q4, is about 8.25%. So 7% is what the government estimates. I have a much more conservative figure. I think all things being equal, we'll achieve 6%. But even 6% itself ties in with the sub-Saharan African average, and it's higher than the global growth rate of about 3%, which is projected.
Now, it's believed that agriculture is now the mainstay of the economy and is a driver of growth. Is that the case?
No, I think agriculture makes the economy less vulnerable because it's missionary agriculture. It's agriculture for self-sufficiency and feeding itself, and also prevents us from importing a significant amount of food. But agriculturally competitive, no, Nigeria is not competitive yet. Take, for example, the cocoa opportunity happening because of what's happening in Ivory Coast. Ghana has been able to lift its cocoa output by about 100,000 tons. Nigeria's output remains stuck at about 200 and something thousand tons. So we've not been able to lift at the commercial level. But the growth actually is going to come from oil output, oil revenue driving the fiscal revenues, and that driving trade and government capital, capital formation.
Okay, let's talk about the oil sector. We know that output has improved to over 2.4 million barrels per day. We know the oil price is somewhere in the region of $98, has even breached $100. And we know that Nigeria is over 90% dependent on oil revenues for the fiscus. The issue is that level of dependency without other sectors being productive. How are authorities dealing with that discrepancies?
Well, the structural imbalances in the Nigerian economy cannot be addressed in 1 year. There are significant structural imbalances and weak linkages. However, the government is committed to, one, addressing the constraints of infrastructure, that's road infrastructure, power infrastructure, port infrastructure, and more importantly, educational infrastructure. All of the above will take a long time to actually accomplish, but they're going to start that. I think their power initiatives have started. The railway infrastructure with the Chinese contract for the Abuja-Kaduna rail and the Lagos-Ibadan rail taking off, we will see some changes. But the point is that power, you don't have to get to 40,000 megawatts to achieve an improvement in productivity. Just moving from 3,000 to 5,000, which can be achieved within a year, or 6,000, can actually drive up productivity. The other point is accepting the use of technology. So productivity from educational reform, productivity from power sector reform, and productivity from adoption of technology could actually sustain the growth trajectory.
I'm going to bring Frank into the conversation here. How realistic do you think these GDP figures are for Nigeria? And contrary to views from analysts, it's not agriculture that's going to drive this growth. It's going to continue to be the bedrock, which is the oil and gas sector. Yeah,
it will always be the growth. The main source of growth will always be the petrochem sector. I think the biggest contributor still in Nigeria is agriculture. And second is retail wholesale trade. But obviously the big growth numbers are sitting in the petrochemical sector.
What do you make of the fact that, and I think Bismarck referred to this earlier on, this question of the productivity and competitiveness of agriculture. Nigeria is a net importer of petroleum products, a net importer of food products, which account for over 50% of their inflation basket in Nigeria. How can we say that these are the drivers of growth when these are also the very things that lead to the state bleeding capital?
Well, not the drivers, the composition is assigned to agriculture, but it is possible because your GDP is derived from consumption expenditure, investment, government expenditure, as well as your balance of payments, which is exports less imports. So even though your exports less imports can be in negative terms, the other things can make up for that, the other components of the economy. But what is employing the most people, creating the most value domestically is still that agricultural sector. So I think therein lies the conundrum. Let's
talk about employment, Bismarck Rewane. And this is a criticism that's constantly being leveled at Nigeria, and you're welcome to debate the figures here. It's suggested that if the economy is growing at 7% or is expected to grow at 7% this coming year, why is it not making a dent on poverty, which is over 45%, and a dent on unemployment, which is over 40%?
Yes, the urban unemployment is 25%. Urban graduate unemployment is over 40%. Again, I go back to the structural weaknesses in the economy. This is an extractive industry driven, a natural wealth economy where you just extract, ship it out to the final consumer outside, bring the revenues in, government shares it, and it's spent. So consumption driven, poor national savings, accumulation of capital is poor, investment is weak, recurrent expenditure is much higher than capital expenditure. So the structural imbalances lead us to the fact that the weak linkages do not even pull any of the sectors out. And the productivity, the skill level, the skill gap that exists means that even those that can be employed at times are unemployable. So you have high unemployment, unemployable workforce. And so significant investments have to be made to actually make. Then structurally, the oil sector should lead into petrochemicals into fertilizers, refining, the entire work all the way down the line to gas and the gas master plan, power. These things are going to take more than a year or two for it to manifest. But I think the important thing is the vision and the leadership, which I think the government is committed to do in this time. Hopefully, after the elections, we'll sit down and get to work and ensure that the long journey starts immediately.
Let's talk about money trickling into the real economy, Bismarck. I mean, some are questioning these growth figures when we know that as a result of industry reforms and other factors within Nigeria, credit hasn't really been flowing from Nigerian banks. And, there is the question as to how does the economy become systematically improved if we're not seeing investments outside of the public sector?
No, it's true. There's no correlation between the credit growth, the GDP growth and credit intermediation. As a matter of fact, the agriculture, which contributes 42% to GDP, has only 1% of the credit, while manufacturing, which contributes only 4% to GDP, has about 60% of the credit available. So one can argue that credit has nothing to do with output, investment, and GDP growth. This is one of the things that the central bank is trying to address by creating incentives and making de-risking the sector so that credit can flow that way. But again, the structural imbalances which I referred to earlier are there, and the bankability of some of these projects is there. So they need to, there's a fundamental structural weakness in the economy which needs to be addressed. And when that is done, gradually and slowly, in the next year or two, you are going to see money move in that direction. In the meantime, the central bank has provided guarantees, the Bank of Agriculture, the Bank of Industry, to enable banks actually focus on this area. But there's need for capacity, management skills and all of that. Go back to the education sector and find that there's a crisis in education in Nigeria. There are 8 million children who are of school enrollment age who are not in any formal form of education. And that's a crisis, that's a time bomb taken away.
Okay, thanks so much to Bismarck Rewane, and I'll thank the heavens right now for being quite kind to our satellite transmission to you. We didn't have too many breaks in transmission there. Bismarck Rewane, CEO of Financial Derivatives in Nigeria. Structural problems within this economy that he's eloquently pointed out. Manufacturing, which we're told is where Africa is the weakest, has seen negative growth in Nigeria, and that sector together with ICT contribute less than 5% of GDP, and yet we're told this is where you could really see fantastic re-engineering of the economy.
Well, economic theory dictates that when a country starts to grow, it starts out in the agricultural industry. As it gets more developed, and I'm talking here infrastructure and addressing some of these structural breaks in the economy as well, then you can move towards greater value-adding activities, of which manufacture and industry are the main components. And we know we're moving that way, but as he alluded to, without consistent electricity supplies, without transport, etc., you aren't able to leverage that sector.
What about issues of FDI, Frank? And I'm talking about the fact that it's reported that in Nigeria, FDI has dropped about 60% in the last few years, that they're not attracting as much foreign direct investment into that economy. We know that it's a major stimulus for emerging markets.
Well, again, FDI is attracted to areas that, one, are growing fast, which Nigeria is doing, arguably, but two, what's the potential for that growth to continue at those rates? And I think foreign investors are looking at the infrastructure and saying, whoa, maybe we would be wiser investing somewhere else where the infrastructure is available for us to grow at 6, 7, 8% per year, and wait till Nigeria catches up on that front. So in a way, it's a problem from both sides, internally as well as attracting external finance.